Hi, this is Jane. This is our political podcast, the second one for the week. We're doing a special edition. I'm talking to you guys tonight with Suzetter and Neal about people's origins, their historical and religious lineage, as well as their ethnic lineage, and how that runs together in the sense that, for example, I'm Swedish and Finnish, and I'm of Lutheran heritage, and my church is from the foundation of Martin Luther. And it talks about how historically, when you follow certain journeys, your ideologies and religious beliefs are going to be shaped through those concepts, and it's going to project onto how you view yourself as a citizen of the world, whether you believe in global citizenship or helping others individually or whatever. So I'm just going to throw out a few concepts before Neal calls. And if he doesn't call, he's the guest speaker tonight, and Suzette and I will be commenting on him. Then we're going to transition into, just the impact of the modern world and why there's so much international conflict right now. And so many countries are butting heads based on what their worldview is. So I'll just start out briefly with some things I've heard on the Catholic channel. One thing, I am not Catholic myself, but I studied them for 20 years while I wrote a screenplay on 14 draft card burners that were 7 men of cloth. So they defied the precepts of government to burn draft files and make a statement. I have been listening to the Catholic channel lately because I find it more interesting than traditional Christian radio. And these are some of the concepts that the Catholic religion has purported in the last few weeks. First of all, they see every rite of the church or every major concept of the church as an ecclesiastical commitment, whether it be marriage, communion, honor to government, any type of biblical truth that they have transcribed into ecclesiastical honor. They expect people to subscribe, and they do deal with fallen Christians too. And the purpose of confession for them is that a person will remain contrite for their shortcomings to God, their sins. They will confess their sins, and then they will get redeemed by God through his grace. If one is not sincere about confessing their sins or their wrongdoing, then the amount of grace they will receive will be proportional to the amount of their sincerity. So that's one thing they were talking about this week. Another thing they were talking about is, let's say you become a priest and you go in the priesthood and you never marry. That's just as important if you enter a sacred marriage and you establish a family foundation and have kids. So their concept is even if you're not in the spotlight of the Catholic leadership, your job is to raise a Catholic child and manifest God's will through those children and teach them the Catholic teachings. So then we have, I'm going to just shift gears for a minute. I've been trying to witness to somebody in my family about their lack of interest in religion, but it's only a perception. I really don't know if they're interested. But the Protestants are more direct. Like in the modern age right now, the Protestants are more into like creating 12-step meetings within the church, healing services, direct contact with God, strengthening your personal journey, all those things that are more like flexible within the Protestant regime. So I think that historically, like most of us who came over, like Suzette came from a different part of the world, and I'm going to let her talk, but I'm a Northern European, and my dad's family got here in the 1880s, and my Finland family got here in the early 1900s. So I wouldn't say that my family on either side was wholeheartedly religious. even though one of them built a church. Well, about three of them built a church in Duluth, Minnesota. But I do think that they use their faith as a form of identity in their Christian cause. And as we saw in the 30 Years' War, when people like Gustavus Adolphus, Sweden's most famous leader, he decided to go to battle individually and fight for his own country, and he died halfway through the war. So I think that, like, at that time, Europe was full of religious duchies and very few national boundaries. So they weren't really established till after the 30 Years' War, where they created national boundaries and formed secular governments to overcome religious persecution. So am I making sense so far, Suzette?
Yes, yes. I would like to hear more about the churches that were built in Minnesota.
Well, mainly like I grew up in the Twin Cities, which is in the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area. So I went to a traditional it's called ELCA church. It's an evangelical Lutheran Christian church. It's part of a network. But then there's other more strict churches like the Missouri Synod, where it was kind of like the Baptist church, where you couldn't dance. They didn't promote fornication and drinking. Like, a lot of these rural cities in northern Minnesota, people drink just like they do in Wisconsin. So they were more like a rigid church. My ex-husband's twin brother married one of those people. But I wouldn't say that religion dominated my family or even my culture. I was more religious just because I was curious about the whole nature of which biblical books were written and by who, like prophets like Isaiah and, suffering of Job and the meaning of the New Testament. But we just went to church. We went to confirmation. We graduated in 8th grade. I became very religious in high school when I was a successful runner. And I attributed all my success to God in the interviews I got. But mainly what I'm trying to say is, now fast forward 50 years, I'm not in the, living during the Nixon administration anymore. I'm living in the Trump administration. And religion seems to be like one of the top three conditional contentions in society for how people define and promote their personal philosophy and how they blend that into their belief system. So with that, I'm going to call Neal, because he's the guest, and then I'll have you talk after he gets in the queue. Okay? You're late and you're on the air. Neal, you're on the air with Suzette and me.
Yes, I was listening to your opening there. So, because I didn't know what the topic was going to be. So, I want to see what you're going to say.
Well, you're the topic. We discussed it last week. You're going to talk about your historical background and how, whether you call it a belief system or a well-researched lineage, how that affects your outlook. And before we go into your story, I just want to get a little bit of feedback from Suzette, because she's been listening patiently. So, Suzette, can you mention to me how your journey from Colombia to the United States and how your ethnic identity and your religion affected you, and how it brought you up to speed to where you are today?
Yes, but I may comment real quick on what you had, your last sentence there before we brought Neal in. I would like to see more people actually express their religious, views, or basically, witness or share the word, or however you wanted to put it. I think there's not enough of that, and I think the youngsters, young adults, children, a lot of parents have chosen not to introduce religion, faith to their children. and are believing that they should decide when they become of age. And I think it's important to start early, kind of guide them, and so then when they come of age, they can make that decision. But if you've never introduced it into your lives, family lives, then it's more of a chore as a young adult, 18 and up, to even consider it. They don't understand it, so why bother? I've got other things to do.
And then they probably don't think, by the time they turn 18, they probably don't think there's no moral absolutes.
Right.
Because
what do I need that for? I've been doing fine without it, but because they don't understand, because it was never introduced. So anyway, I would just like to see more of that. As far as that, more of that, and less politics.
That's a good. So, would you or Neal like to go first in sharing your historical, ethnic, how you were brought up, what's important to you, and how religion impacted you? Who would like to go first?
Well, we'll let our guest go first. Neal, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Suzette. Okay. I have to agree with your last statement too, Suzette. The Bible does say, raise the children up in the admonition of the Lord. So yeah, if they don't know anything about it, when they're growing up, then yes, it'd be very difficult to introduce them to them when they're teenagers or even younger adults. So I have to agree with you 100% on that. I'm not really sure where to start at, Jane. How far back do you want me to go?
I would like you to talk about how the main concept is how you feel about how your ethnicity ties into your Israeli culture, and what modifications you made as an adult to make a stronger connection to God, so to speak, including your common practices of not eating pork, and how your religious outlook affects how you look at nation states. Are you a globalist? Are you a individual who doesn't want to get involved like the Amish? Or just like your thread of continuity and your journey?
All right. Okay, let me start before I forget all that. Okay, I guess I'll start with, I was raised as a Christian, and like many typical African American people, I happen to be raised in a Pentecostal church, almost from the day we're born, we're in church. So I feel I have a very strong understanding of Christianity, and I think I have a very strong spiritual understanding of God. And so basically growing up as a Christian all my life, I happen to be in my opinion, one of my family members that took it more seriously than the other ones. So even at a younger age, I was always fascinated about God. I was always fascinated about learning about God and understanding. So I was the first one to get to church and one of the last one to leave. I would go even when my mom or my family didn't go, I would go because I was just always interested in knowing more about them. And so grew up pretty much, like I say, at service Wednesday, Fridays, Sundays, whenever they had it, I was there pretty much. And so that's the kind of interest I had. And so I grew up, understand Christianity like I think most American does. And I enjoyed it. I found it profitable. It gave me peace for the most part. But I have to admit, throughout it, there was always something there that I couldn't, that didn't bring it all together, even though for the most part it did. And so,
and you also didn't drink in college like most people.
No, no. Even to this day, I'm not a drinker. It's not. Yeah, I didn't start drinking until maybe, or having a drink of anything, maybe 10 years ago, maybe. So yeah, never really. There was something that we're taught when we're growing up not to drink alcohol. So it was one of the things that stuck with me. And many other things if you grow up in a Pentecostal family. So there's a lot of different mores that you learn, whether you're in the Bible or not.
May I ask a question?
Yes, you may.
So far, thank you. So would you say, I mean, okay, as I understand it, the Pentecostal church is more or less, it's constructed. It's, so there are things that people do willingly, of course, because of the Lord. But also, do you feel that you had a calling more than others? Because others, of course, have faith. You had said that you were basically so interested in the church at a young age, and so for me, I would think that that's the calling because of your thirst for knowledge, to know Him.
I don't know, say, if I had a calling, because I never really desired to, in essence, when I think of a calling, in a sense that maybe preach or be a preacher or a pastor or minister. I never really had that desire per se, but it was just the desire of knowing, just wanting to know more and more and more. So I would say that was more of the desire that I had.
A curiosity, so to say.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, very strong. Yes.
Thank you.
And yeah. So from there, obviously just grew up being a Christian, taught Sunday school in the different churches that I was in. Somewhat of a deacon in one of them as well. So that's how life went. And then what I think Jane is interested in is a change occurred. So I'm sitting in church, many weeks go by, and there's issues that keep coming up that I'm going, I don't have an answer to this. I don't have the answer. The pastors never, and I would go to the pastors and ask, and they really couldn't give me an answer that I really understood. And then I remember reading the Bible and reading it, and it said something differently than what the pastor had taught me. And so I just let it slide because, okay, the pastor knows more than I do about it. And so that's how life went on for 10, 20, 30 years. And then one day I happened to be at a different church, and it was, they call it a super grace church, I think is what they call it. But it was so different than any other church I went to. They actually studied the Bible. It wasn't just reading, they were studying. I mean, we would be on one chapter or one verse for a whole week or a day. I mean, just broke down the words, every word in that chapter, whatever. So it was completely different. And it was still a Christian church, but it was just, I think people call it hyper grace. But anyway, it just woke my mind up even more to understanding the Bible and studying it. And then because of that brought back some of the questions that I had about it, 10, 20 years ago, even when I was a young child reading it. I'm going, oh, okay. And it started opening up answers to me that I didn't have before. And that growth just continued to happen. And then one day, I was on the internet, and I came across a Hebrew Israelite video. I have no idea who they were. And so I did listen to them, and it just right off the top, they start talking about things that I had questions about and they had an answer for. And the answer was simple and it was logical and it made sense. And so I guess that was my journey that brought me into understanding what the Israelite culture was is how I first came about it. It just made sense, and so I wanted to hear more. And so I started listening to more and more videos, and it kept making more and more sense. I'm going, hold on. I've been in church for almost 30-something years, and they never explained it like this. They never explained it.
It was fulfilling.
Yeah, it really was. It really was. And it was simple. They didn't have to, use fancy words. They didn't have to do anything. They just read it directly from the book. And I go, oh my God, it's been there all this time. And that's how it really started. And so, yes, so Jane, from that point, as I started reading it, it did start. One of the interesting thing that came up is they did sort of identify it with a ethnic tint to it, in a sense, because they started mentioning, they said, well, okay, the people of Israel. And they went through different Bible verses where they would point it out, and then they said, well, the children of Israel would first of all, they said they scattered all over the world, so this is not an exclusive list, but they're referring mostly to the people when they're talking about the area in America, and they were saying, well, we believe that people, African American, there's Latinos, and Native American, like Indian, they're saying these people would be considered, Israelites. And of course, I've never heard that before. It was like, what? And so it was. I didn't even believe it at first.
The Mormons believe it too, and Suzetter has relatives in Utah. They believe the Native Americans one of the lost tribes.
Yes, I have come to understand that is true. They understand, yes, that they believe that as well about the Native American. So again, obviously, and so as I kept listening to them, I kept hearing things that I go, hey, I've never heard this in church. So I'm sitting here internally just struggling because I'm going, they showed me right there in the book, it said it right there in the book, but of course I've been a Christian for 40, 50 years. I'm going, no. So internally, I'm struggling back and forth, not wanting to believe what I actually read in the book. But eventually, at one time, I go, Neal, you see it for yourself. You have to believe what the book says. So it was a metamorphosis where I had to actually forget everything I was taught in church for the most part.
But it was the Old Testament. You're not talking about the New Testament, right?
It's old and new. The whole book. I had to relearn. I had to unlearn actually what I was taught in the church. It's not that they're not teaching the stories per se, but again, from the Israelite point of view, there's a different viewpoint. There's a different lens you look at it, and when you do that, you see it completely different. And so that's what occurred. And so when you do that, yes, it did change my life. It did change my life in the sense that if I'm going to follow this lifestyle, because it is a lifestyle, there was changes. There was things I had to make. So when you read in what you would call the Old Testament, the Torah, the first 5 chapters, it has instruction. It says God gave instructions to the Israelites saying, okay, I'm separating you guys from the rest of the world. I'm choosing you guys. Nothing that we did, nothing we earned. He chose it for whatever reason. He said, I'm going to set apart you guys because I want you guys to be the teachers and priests of the world. I want you guys to teach the people my law, statutes, commandment. So that's what as an Israelite, I come to understand we were separated by God, his choice. And so we had rules to follow. We had laws and statutes and commandments to keep. And again, obviously, there's other people. I was mentioning there's other people also believe that they're the children of God too. I'm not one of these people who say I am and they're not. I'm not. If that's what they believe, that's what they believe. I am okay with that. If that's what they understand, that has nothing to do with me as far as what I believe. So I'm not against anyone else self-identifying in any way they choose to identify themselves. But so for me, yes, it was to start understanding the Torah, start being obedient to what God's words is, and that's the thing that changed my life. But because the Bible is not incongruent with America and American laws, American rules, American custom. So there is a difference. And obviously, any Israelite that gets on this journey, they will tell you, you will lose family, friends, loved ones in this journey, because if they don't see this calling, if they don't take this time to learn it, like the Bible says, your closest people will become your enemy. And that's what the Bible says, and you got to count the cost to follow God. So yes, it's been difficult in many ways, but again, as I say, even from a child, I was always curious to follow about God and to be obedient.
Now can you fast forward and talk about how the sons of Noah has? You told me it's not race based; it's more of a bloodline, because Suzette's not.
Yes.
And then we'll shift to Suzette's story.
Oh, okay, yeah, I would prefer you ask me questions, because this could go on for 3 weeks me talking. I'm trying to so questions is a lot easier for me to do. Yes, as far as it is a nationality. So it is considered ethnic group. It is considered nationality, because again, in the Bible, where we get the information from is Noah, and he had 3 sons, and of his 3 sons, he had Shem, Ham, and Japheth.
By the way, can you take yourself off speaker?
I certainly can.
Yeah, because it's too rumbly.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm sure. Okay, so if you look in chapter 10 of Genesis, that's where you get the genealogy of the sons of Noah, and in that you have 70 different nations, and that's where all the people of the world come from. So you come from. That's what our understanding is. You come from either Shem, Ham, or Japheth. Okay, which would be Semites, Hamites, and Japhites. And that's what we believe. So even though we have modern terms like Cubans and Venezuelans and Mexicans, those aren't words you'll find in the Bible, but these individual people belong to one of these 70 nations, and so do we all. And then where people make the confusion is that, well, let me sort of give you my understanding. Of course, people can disagree with me, and people do, and that's perfectly fine as well. But of the 3 sons of Noah, my understanding was they were all melanated people of color, let's say it that way. And where people get confused at is that when we talk about Semites, I would consider myself a Semite. And when we talk about Hamites, let's say what I know we call people Africans, but African is really just a continent with 54 different countries, so there's all kinds of people on there. But if you take like the Egyptian, that would be one of the sons of a Hamite. If you take Libyans, that would be Hamite. So even though, and if you go into the continent, it's hard to tell these people apart. A Shemite and a Hamite, for the most part, look pretty much similar, because just one of the stories, the Israelites went into Egypt, and we were there for hundreds of years, and of course married Egyptians and vice versa. So it's really hard to tell the people apart just by their phenotype, but the people themselves know who they are.
But so I have a question. I have a question. In Egypt, there were some fake gods called Ra, and why did the Egyptians enslave the Jews so long if they were also Israeli descent?
Well, try something here. Let me see if this works. Is this clear or is this not clear?
It's a little rumbly, but it's not horrible.
Okay, I put it back on speaker, but I lowered the volume here. But okay, I'll take it off and speak.
You don't have to look up a verse. I'm just asking for your strength,
I understand.
because a lot of Egyptians, it's a mixed culture. There's Christians, Muslims, and Jews there, and it was also a center of intelligence back in the 6th century. So like there was a lot of scientific things discovered there, and like it was more of a secular universities type setting too.
Correct. That is correct. And well, to sort of answer that, again, you remember the story when Joseph was sold by his brothers, and basically he ended up as a slave in Egypt, but then he rose in the ranks because he was able to tell Pharaoh his dreams and stuff like that. And then of course the big famine came, and the Israelites ended up going into Egypt, and obviously the story of Joseph and all that. So they ended up living there with his brother, and since Joseph was second in command, they weren't slaves initially. So again, I believe it's 70 people as an Israelite went into there, but when they came out as a nation. So initially they weren't enslaved, but the Bible said after time went, whatever it said something about the Pharaoh didn't know Joseph.
One of Pharaoh's daughters favored Moses or something like that.
Say that again?
Which one found Moses in a basket or something like that?
Yeah, that was one of the Pharaoh's daughter. That's correct. That was correct. That was earlier, or later. That was later. But anyway, at that point, we were in Egypt for quite some time, growing as people. But then the Bible said there's a Pharaoh that came along that didn't know Joseph, and then that's when the enslavement happened. And then again, being enslaved for a while, they called on God for a period of time. He finally sent Moses, and they got delivered, and that's why we have Passover coming up here on April 12th to remember when God brought the Israelite out of Egypt. So even though at that point what you're seeing is, again, even though the people look very similar, because being melanated, people in those days identify themselves by the tribe they're from, not by their skin color. The skin color is a modern thing, how people, identify themselves. But in the past, you were identified by your family that you came from. So the Egyptian would have been the Hamite group, whereas the Israelites would have been the Semitic group. And so in that sense, they have no problem enslaving them, unfortunately, because man.
So that
wicked to man.
Okay, we're gonna get back to you. I'm gonna ask you one more question, then I'm gonna transfer to Suzette. Okay. How does your image of yourself as an Israelite, how is it portrayed in your relationship to modern concepts such as international diplomacy, how Israel treats Gazans, how America projects itself on the world sometimes in a violent way, like in proxy wars, or sometimes they do it in a good way, like distributing food. And do you have any thoughts about that?
Okay, those are several.
Just one or two. I mean, just answer. Like, do you see Trump as the Antichrist or the Savior?
Well, no, I don't see Trump. I don't see Trump in that way. Either way, the Bible says there's many antichrists. If you are against Christ, an individual can be an antichrist, whether he's a president or not. And there's many antichrists in the world. So I don't know. I just see Trump as just a man and president. He's just doing what he believes. So I don't see him as any per se.
So you don't think America's in a historical situation where they can alter worldwide diplomacy with their policies in the Middle East and Europe?
Oh, sure, they definitely can have an effect on that. There's no doubt about it. I mean, they have an effect on it right now because, in a sense, they are backing the Israelis right now. And obviously, the Israeli agenda is to, control that whole land from the sea to the Euphrates. And so their objective is to remove all the Palestinians out of that land. Because again, as I said, they believe that they are the chosen people as well. And so and again, in the Bible, it does say that the Israelites will get that land. But where my difference is, in comparison to the Israeli, I understand that's not something done by man. That's something done by God. And that won't happen until Christ actually comes on the scene to make that happen. And I think I'm very much in alignment with the Orthodox Jews that are in the land who are protesting against the Zionist Jews who are in control right now. So America has a very strong impact because if it wasn't for us back in the Israeli, they would not be able to do it. And I'm going to be honest with you, at this point in time, I don't think it's going to make any difference because I know we're setting up to go to war against Iran. But biblically, the Bible says, the United States is going to lose to Iran, Russia, and China, the BRICS nation. That war, the United States is going to lose. So
that is Armageddon. And for people of Gaza, they're already in Armageddon.
Absolutely.
They're already living hell on earth.
Absolutely.
So let's we have 3 listeners actually on this video channel. So let's just briefly shift to Suzette because I invited her and I don't want her to feel left out, and she has a lot of She was a Catholic and a Mormon, and now I think she's just an evangelical, I'm pretty sure. But Suzette, why don't you tell your story?
Well, mine isn't as interesting. It's pretty basic. I grew up in the Catholic Church just because that's what we were. Never questioned it. And when I was going to catechism to be, confirmed there, I had questions during our Bible study when I was in high school at that point. And so I asked one of the priests that were there a question about God, and first one was I asked is, how do we know he's there? He exists. Now, I've been brought up in the Catholic Church, but just went along with, the process and the ceremonious, standing up and thanks to be God and all of that, and just did it, But
there's a lot of liturgy. There's a lot of liturgy.
Yes. And then I started questioning about confession. Why do we need to confess to priests? Why can't we just talk to God directly? I mean, we pray to God. I don't go through a priest to pray. Why do I have to confess to a priest to get to God? And he said, no, that it's not for me to question. It's just for me to have faith. And I'm like, it's not for me to question. Well, that doesn't sound right. And
right.
Anyway, nobody could answer my question, so similar there to Neal. And so I just kind of fell away from it for a while. And then later I had gotten married, and the gentleman I married was actually going to go into the priesthood, and I guess he decided he wasn't going to do that after all. It was too much sacrifice. He ended up going into the Marine Corps and was going to be, I forget what they call it, something leader.
Like a corporal? Like a corporal?
No, as far as religious to the men, the other Marines, that type of thing.
He was probably going to be a chaplain.
Something like that, yeah. Mm-hmm. In the Catholic Church, you can't marry. Priests don't marry. So I think that's why he decided. I think I changed his mind, which maybe makes me Jezebel. No. Anyway, So I left the church, and he just got busy with Marines being deployed here and there. And so when he came back, he had told me that there were just several things that were pointing him in the direction of the Latter-day Saints, which are Mormons. And so he said, I want to look into that more. So he had missionaries come over, and I would sit, and we both listened to their lessons and what they had to say. And he says, well, what do you think? And I'm like, I don't know. What do you think? I don't have any opinion, really. I mean, you're more into this than I am. And he says, well, I think we should consider being baptized into the church. And I'm like, okay. So we did. And then we had our first son, and they have a ceremony called sealing. And so that way our children, as they're born at a certain age, they become eligible for being sealed to you for eternity. So he goes through this process in the temple. And then we know that our sons, we have two sons, we'll be able to see them, when we reach heaven, basically. And so that will be for eternity. So instead of being separated.
Amen.
I don't know exactly how that works, but yeah. So then after we moved to Hawaii, we came back here to California because we're both from, well, he's from Connecticut anyway. I'm from here, born and raised.
How old were you when you came from Colombia to California?
Actually, I was born here. It was my great-grandfather that came. And so from there, we just, later, my grandpa and then my mom.
Okay.
And
so you're not an immigrant. You were born in America.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents or great-grandparents came here legally. And then, of course, my grandfather, since they were legal, now he's legal. And then my mom and then me. So I guess, yeah, third generation born here in the United States.
Cool.
So, yeah. So, anyway, after that, we got divorced. And we actually went to a Mormon counselor. They provide a lot of good things for families, but so that counselor just said, well, I think you guys would be better separated. It's like, okay. It wasn't violent or anything like that. It just wasn't good anymore, and we just weren't compatible anymore. And this was after 8 years of marriage. And so, anyway, the Mormon Church.
Did you have custody of the kids?
What?
Did you have custody of the kids?
Yes, I did. Originally, I did. Because I moved back home, and I lived very far from work, or worked very far from, where I lived. And so it was getting difficult because I wasn't able to see my kids at nighttime. They were at my mom's all day. And so my husband at that time said, well, what do you think about the boys living with me? The way his job was, he got off at 3 o'clock. They could join sports if they want to. They were like, 5 and 3? Yeah, because they're 2 years apart. So anyway, I said, what am I going to say to that? Because he says, I can be there to raise our sons if you can't. I'm like, okay, well, shoot. I'd rather have them grow up right than go wrong. So, okay. He had the support of his mother, his family, his brothers, and all that. So the children would have a large family, different, environment altogether. Be home when the kids were there, when they got home from school, and this and that. So that was very difficult to do. But it wasn't like I couldn't see them anytime I wanted to, because where he lived is where my work was. So, so it made it easier for me to pop in and pop out. But then his job had taken him to Tracy, California, and that's up north. So that became a little bit difficult, but flights were cheap back then. You could fly to San Francisco for $50, $49. So, so that was easy to do on the weekends. Anyway, So he stayed in the church. He raised the kids, the boys in the church. He remarried, and she was in the church, his wife, and she had a couple of kids of her own, so 4 in total. But they were all raised in the church. The church has rules: no drinking, no smoking, no caffeine, and I'm trying to think. There's another one. Anything, those 3. I mean, those 4 were, really big deal, because you don't want to poison the temple, which is your body.
Caffeine is pretty. That's pretty harsh. No caffeine.
Well, caffeine is a stimulant, so you don't want to. That's what they believe. So they also have family night, which you can choose what night. They at what time we recommended Monday nights, but because of lifestyles and people having to work and have life, they said, okay, just choose a day that at nighttime you'll have a family Bible study, and the kids get to choose the topic, so they're involved. They get to read a scripture from the Bible or the Book of Mormon, either or, because they use both. And prior to that, the kids make a snack with mom in the kitchen, so they can have brownies or something else, or something without caffeine. So brownies is a bad example, but anyway, so that way after Bible study, then they can have their treats and then go from there. So I thought that was good, and everybody in the family gets involved in the church. They want to call it a cult, because they're very isolated at one point, and then at another point, they're out with the missionaries spreading the word. And so when I say isolated, I mean within the church. So people who are sick, if they need help with meals, we have, which is called the women's part, and then the men have their part, and the elders. And then, so after we break from the main church, we split, and the kids go to their daycare or to their classes. And so we have Bible study for the women, and then the men do what they do as far as studying. Women also have another activity once a month where they get together there at the church, and we're all either knitting, sewing, comforters, signing up on the list for meals to deliver to different families that, like I said, if they're sick, they can't provide for their family, the woman make dinner for everybody. So we make sure that their family, they all get fed until she gets well, or they get well. And that was fun. And children, or the young teenagers, I was with they were called the My Mates, and they're like 15 and up. And they also have that for the men, or for the boys. And so we would have activities together, like ice blocking, which you get these big giant squares of ice and a hill, which we all met at, and then you just slide down that hill on a big block of ice and roll down to Christmas caroling, just stuff to keep them busy, and also studying. So we'd always end with the word, always begin with prayer. But yeah.
See,
so in the morning,
I like the Mormons, and they've been to my house twice.
Oh, yeah, they're good. They're very nice, very respectful. So pray in the morning, pray at night, family-wise, and they are self-sustaining. They have fields, as far as, farms, where they grow stuff, and cows, and everything you get at the supermarket, you can get at the store. But the store is for if you, let's say my husband lost his job for, 6 months or whatever. But at the beginning, he just lost his job, and so I get in touch with the head woman, leader, or whatever you want to call her. I can't remember. Relief Society president. It's been a while, so forgive me. Anyway, the Relief Society president. And so then she would go to the bishop and let them know our situation. And then she would come back, find out how many people are in your family, and then she has a list of items like a grocery store, and you pick the items that you want off of there, and then you go on a certain day to the store. Ours is in San Bernardino, so go out there, and it's a grocery store. It looks like a regular grocery store, except, like I said, it's just for the church. And so you pick your items off, they pay your rent, if you have rent or mortgage or utilities or whatever, till you get on your feet. And then I guess it's like every 3 months you go and talk to the bishop to see where you are at. Now, if you have difficulty finding a job, there's always somebody in the church that seems to own a business, which is kind of cool, or is in a position that they can, depending on what you do, they may have an opening at that person's work, and so they'll kind of get you in that way. But mostly they own the businesses. So
I did know about,
get a job that way.
I knew about them helping with rent because they helped one of my friend's daughters in Spokane, Washington with rent.
And that rent is paid by the church, which is your tithe. So every Sunday you pay your tithe, and if you want to put a little extra when they pass the basket around, you can do that. But the tithe goes, sign a check and straight to the church, and then you have the little extras to help the missionaries. That goes towards missionaries and other stuff. So they're very self-sustaining. But
they are. And even in places like Minnesota, when people come to witness here and go door to door, they have rented apartments all over the U.S. Like they have Mormon-owned housing. So they have. It's already established.
Yes. And any type of tragedy that happened, there's like with the earthquakes that they're having right now in Taiwan and stuff, they'll provide aid. They'll get together as far as the church goes and figure out, what it is that they're going to go and offer. And they just take it and they give it to them. If they need any assistance with anything, they don't have to be a part of the church or anything. They just help out however they can. And so any disaster, they're usually there. They really don't want their members to rely on any form of government whatsoever, and that's why the tithe sustains the church to pay for those people who can't.
Do they view the government as evil?
No, they have to obey the laws of the land as far as that goes. As far as evil, no, but because their church and their belief that it is Christ's church. Christ provides.
I get it. So based on we're gonna end the show in about 15 minutes because I have to sleep for my night shift. I have a question. Based on your entire vast religious experience, which I'm really impressed with the Mormon church. Even when I invited to my house, I found out more, but in your vast recollection of that religion, which is very supportive, and then your transition back into an evangelical life, like what lessons did you learn on? Do you believe in the concept of give to Caesar's what is Caesar's and give to God's what is God? Like keep it separate? Or what takeaways have you had from your life experience?
I would go with that. At first, when my husband and I were told about the tithing and, that we had to be diligent with that. And then we would be allowed to go into the temple because you can't go in the temple at all unless you paid your tithing and consistently. And then you go and get your special garments and stuff. But I think, it would be separate for sure. I think that Mormon church and, as far as the law of the land, you go along with that. I think their generosity to others speaks for itself. I like the structure of the church, but as far as being Mormon now, I don't know. I don't go to any church now. I just pray directly to God because somebody told me not to ask questions. So I'm asking questions and I talk to God. He doesn't always answer in my time, but it's his time. And that time may just be because I needed to do something or learn something. And I found that that's actually worked out for me.
And if you go on YouTube, there's a preacher named Charles Stanley. He died. He died about a year and a half ago. He has a lot of sermons about what do you do while you wait on the Lord? Like, how do you develop patience in your time of trial? Like all those things that those universal struggles that people have, and the bigger questions like, where's God when I really need him? He's a good preacher for that.
Oh, okay.
Because you've had your share of trials too.
Oh yeah, definitely, for sure. I try and look at the broader picture, even though at the moment I don't understand. But then things start occurring, and then I start understanding. It's like, oh, okay, so I need to do this first for this person, or talk to this person, or call this person. For some reason, they may have needed to hear something, and so I'll give them a call. And before you know it, I'm not thinking about my problems anymore. I'm thinking and helping others. And then I think, oh, so that's what you wanted me to do. It wasn't you weren't answering me. You were giving me all these hints. Hello.
I think another thing is that, like, when I went through my gambling stuff, and Neal went through a divorce, and you went through your trial of being paralyzed. Like, sometimes we have a lot of guilt and shame that if we were raised in a shame-based family, I have guilt I have guilt even when I don't do anything wrong. And then that's why we have to kind of reestablish our concept of who God is in our life, because he's really there to help. He's not there to condemn us.
Right. My curiosity about religion, it lies with the missing. Well, they're not missing, with the books that weren't included in the Bible, and who chose the canons or the chapters of the Bible not to be in it. So the Bible is not complete, and there were chapters that were taken out. Now I got an explanation that said, well, because of the paper that they were scribing everything on, and it took time because it was by hand, that they just decided that the popular books would remain together in the Bible, and the other ones they would just, because they couldn't afford it, it just took a lot of time because they didn't have printers back then, and so I would,
That's
I guess
kind
so.
of
I don't know what else.
That's a little lame-o answer. Now, there's 2 or 3 books in the Catholic Bible that aren't in the Lutheran Bible, and also there's in the Book of Mormon, there's at least 5 chapters that are not in the mainstream Christian books. And I watched a movie on Joseph Smith and how all those books got inscribed as time went on. But then he also
let me say also, Jane, what Suzette said about some missing books. As far as Israelites, we actually go with the Apocrypha too. So if you go to the King James 1611, you will have it listed there. So we actually read 80 books and not the 66. And if you go back, and originally the Catholic books did have it in as well, but the Protestant took it out. So we do.
So there's 80 books, not 66?
Yes.
Well, I can't think of this one book, but it's in the Catholic Church brings it up time to time, and it's nowhere. It's not one I've ever seen in my own Bible. So,
yeah.
Now that we all discussed our private journey, the final question is, how can we take our religious background and either be a good citizen of the world and be less dogmatic in the political fights we're facing? Does anyone have a comment on that?
Well, yeah, I do. I think that it's always bothered me that there are so many churches that broke out, after Christ came. It just doesn't make sense to me that everybody claims to be the true church, as Neal was suggesting, as, just don't hate that one religion or whatever, because we all don't know. It's only God knows. And that's true. And so why these different churches claim to be the chosen people, well, they don't know. I think that's kind of arrogant, in God's face, basically saying, we're the ones. Hey, God, whoa, pick us. And it just makes me nuts to think of it that way. So
I do have a comment on that when you're done.
Okay. So with that said, I don't believe that you need a priest to, a third party or whatever to get involved in your prayers. I feel strongly that you should be able to talk to God in your own home, in your car, wherever, directly. And that when we pray, that we're praying, we're asking God for things, but I think we need to more praise God for the things that we have, and blessings be upon all.
And
that's all.
what I would say about that is, Jane and I have had some discussion about the Israelites
and fights
a little bit, and so if you hear people talk about it that don't know about it, they'll say, well, Black Hebrew Israelites, they put that connotation on it, whereas we as Israelites, we're not focus on the skin color of people, because again we understand that even the Israelites, the 12 tribes, come in all shades of color. So we're not caught up in what a person's skin color is in that sense. But as far as, Jane, you're talking about, obviously politics and religion, they merge together sometimes. But as far as Israelites, we believe that the Bible said, live peacefully with all men. So as far as we understand it, is to follow God's laws, follow His commandments, His precepts. And I think why that makes it different is because Jane, you mentioned, okay, you live with a lot of guilt and shame and stuff like that. And I think the reason
Lutheran guilt
a lot of people do is for the fact that they have they learn religious things that's not necessarily listed in the book. And because you shouldn't be living that way, because again, the Bible said, for the believers, He doesn't give you a spirit of fear. But see, when we learn religion per se, some of it gives you these rules that God didn't say was against them. So the key is finding out what God says are things that He don't want you to do compared to what a church may come up in their own code. So I think that would make a big difference.
Okay, I kind of forgot what I said about Suzette, but I when I was talking with her, but I just want to bring up two things before I end my part of the show. The 7 books of the Bible that aren't in the Protestant one is Judith 1 and 2, Maccabees, Wisdom, Sirach, Sirach, and Baruch, Baruch. Those books are in the Catholic Bible. One thing I want to say is, though, as Christian Gentiles that merged with the, like, in other words, Jesus, when He died on the cross, He allowed the Gentiles to enter into His favor, and our souls were redeemed, which means we didn't have to be Israel to obtain permanent salvation. So technically, Christians are supposed to be, in a sense, the light of the world, but they're also supposed to turn the other cheek. They're supposed to not condemn their enemies. They're supposed to make peace, not war. They're supposed to turn this is in Isaiah, but they're supposed to turn their swords into plowshares. And love is supposed to prevail, but we don't see that in the world right now. We just see mudslinging and hatred. And I'm afraid what's going to happen if America loses Europe as allies.
I agree with a lot of what you said, but also I'm trying to find it right now as far as the chapter where it talks about, basically you can only turn the cheek so much.
Right. Well, actually, I know a theologian who wrote about turning the other cheek, and he has some different ideas about that. Like it was some kind of custom.
But you got to base that off of individuals and the country. I mean, that's two different things. I mean, a country does have the right, their sovereignty to protect themselves, but so you got to make sure you split that up. If you're talking about individuals or you're talking about the nation, that's.
Well, I have a book here called Contrast Community, and Jesus was talking about turning your cheek the right or to the left. And back in Hebrew culture, it meant something else. But I haven't read the book in 5 years, so I have to look it up. But basically, I think that what I'm seeing now, and I don't want to bring this point up at all tonight because we've had too nice of a discussion. The only difference I see now is with Christian nationalists. They're kind of cherry picking and finger point who's the righteous Christian, who deserves to be on the throne of righteousness versus who's the fictitious Christians. And that to me is not the choice. That is not a government job.
Right.
You know, like, let's
I
work
think-
together on some kind of commonality.
Well, I think, we are going to be judged individually, and so we can only do
So
our
much.
best, to adhere to the word and the commandments. And, yes, we can go to church and listen to the word there as well. But, I mean, I think it's the way you live your life. And if you have a lifestyle that is, going around and being promiscuous and other ways, you'll be judged by that, once
Right, because
you come before him.
you're not praising the Lord by doing carnality.
Right. But people believe that, there's no hell.
Well,
Some religions.
Kanye West is a prime example, showing his spiritual wife's body off, but claiming he's a Christian. Like, a lot of his actions, I'm not just targeting him, I'm just saying, a lot of his actions are they don't make sense. They're not edifying the spirit. And there's plenty of sinners in the world. I don't care what color they are. There's a lot of them. But with that, I don't want to end the show on Kanye West. Can you guys say one or two more statements before we end the show?
Well,
You don't have to, but I'm just asking you to.
I just think that religion provides structure. It provides discipline. I mean, everything in it and around it is good. As far as the things that we need to do, I think there would be more peace in the world. Definitely, if more people abided by it. It's not for the government to decide or to control and say you must. It's a personal thing, and that's where freedom of choice comes from. I would like to see more parents introduce some form of religion or just introduce their children to God and let them know what he's about. Parents must be educated just before they can do that, but and then they can decide when they're 18, this is for me or this isn't for me, or just like Neal did, he had to go through a few churches before he found where it clicked for him. And so with that, I think faith is very important for us to invest our lives into. And so that's my last statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Neal, do you have a last comment?
No.
Okay, well, you guys, I enjoyed this discussion because it's edifying and it's forwarding the kingdom. And thank you for joining me tonight, okay?
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Okay, God bless you all. God bless you all.
Suzetter.
Okay, bye-bye. Thanks.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.